Hi, I am Jessica Jackson. I'm the Director of Professional Learning for the Learner Variability Project. And prior to coming to Digital Promise, I was in education for 20 years as a teacher, a principal, an academic director and coach. And so I'm really excited to have the opportunity to moderate this panel today because we have some amazing leaders and researchers. And so I'm going to kick it over to Ty to get us started. And if you could, Ty, just introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning or good afternoon to you all. My name is Ty or Tyrone. I am a senior improvement partner with an organization known as Partners in School Innovation. I've been at Partners for about 3 years now. My work is in schools where I support leaders and teachers around cycles of inquiry related to whatever idea that they want to test out or data that they want to really spotlight. Prior to working at Partners, I worked in the classroom, largely in special education as a teacher for about 5 years, and then as an assistant principal and a coach for about another 5 years. Outside of my work in education, I am a Philly-based educator, I'm an activist, and I'm a writer, and I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. Michelle, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm Michelle Dawson. I am the Senior Director of Innovation and Technology for Compton Unified School District in the South LA region of California. I have been in the education field and worked in Silicon Valley for the past 30 years. I have held positions in San Francisco Unified, Napa County Office of Ed, and have been a leader in Santa Ana. I truly am committed to closing the achievement gap for underserved students through the lens of equity and social justice.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so excited to have you today. And lastly, but not least, my colleague, Allison Shell, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, nice to see you all. I'm Allison Shell. I'm the Senior Research Scientist on the Learner Variability Project at Digital Promise. I've been with Digital Promise for about 6 years, and my background is in cognitive psychology. So before I was at Digital Promise, I was doing a lot of research on the mind and the brain, and specifically on how language and the brain and the mind are all connected. But at Digital Promise, my work is really synthesizing and translating the science of learning so that educators can have research at their fingertips to understand the whole learner. So it's been really amazing to work with such a great group of educators to work together to bring science and practice together.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. I want to kick off this first question, and which is, how does understanding learner variability and whole child practices support developing powerful learners? And I'd love for Allison, if you could kind of kick us off, and then we'll move in to hear more from Michelle and Ty about how this looks in their worlds.
Great. Yeah, thanks. So we have a whole website devoted to answering this question called the Learner Variability Navigator. So this is really the crux of sort of what we're trying to uncover and to get at. But we believe that when you see the whole learner, so we're looking beyond just their academic outcomes and behaviors, but really thinking about where they come from, what their identity is, what their interests are. When we can connect learning to who they are and what they care about in the world, then learning becomes powerful. It becomes authentic. The students care about it. It becomes connected to their worlds. They can connect it to the things that they're thinking about. And one thing that's really important, I think, to understand is that we can't make assumptions about who our learners are. So just based on the way that they come into class, what they look like, there's so much more to uncover. And so, at the Learner Variability Project, one of the things we try to do is showcase, so many of the factors across the whole learner, across their social emotional learning, their backgrounds, their cognition, and sort of their academic skills and knowledge, to think about how is this all connected? You can't teach math to a student who has math anxiety. You can't, teach math to a student who's exhausted because they've been up all night, working another job. So we really try to understand how everything is connected, and think about how that's going to affect their learning.
Thanks.
If I could jump in and just let you guys know that, we know that 50% of students have some sort of learning diversity. And we know in Compton, we are a community that has a low socioeconomic community. We have 100% free and reduced lunch, 34% ELL students, and our students come in with a lot of diverse backgrounds and even trauma from immigration, family situations, homelessness and foster youth, food insecurity, or even drug use. So we have students that come in with diverse interests, but yet diverse backgrounds. So when we think about powerful learning, we really need to look at the whole child, look at their background and their interests, and really, make sure that our students just aren't performing well academically, but they get the social emotional supports they need, the skills they need to be really able to monitor and transgress into a really complex world. They have to develop learning behaviors such as perseverance, self-control, attentiveness, even financial learning to be able to overcome some of these obstacles. So when we think about becoming a powerful learner, am I jumping ahead? I just want to make sure. I want to think about what we did in Compton to really think about understanding the variability and developing the powerful learners. So we took some of those ideas and we developed a model. It's called the Equity-Driven Blended Learning plus PBL model. And you can see it in every school. And what we do with that is we leverage the power of adaptable programs from technology to garner data to help decide what our students are going to be learning, to make sure that we are meeting all their learning goals. We also bring in the authentic learning opportunities through PBL, and we do small group instruction to be able to make sure that every student is getting what they need. So leveraging the power of technology to differentiate, to personalize, and to really change the learning experience is one of the things that we're doing, as well as making sure that we have the social emotional supports that we need through our wellness centers that we have at 24 schools, through our PBIS programs, and our free counseling programs.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I really appreciate, you're naming some of the qualities that you're thinking about, like perseverance and all these things, beyond academics that really matter. I think that's important for, whole child practices, and then all the different things that you're doing to really prepare them, I think is wonderful. Ty, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that Allison and Michelle covered a lot. I'll just echo that, learner variability and whole child practices, gets at the unique set of strengths and challenges that each child comes with, and allows us to, develop powerful school experiences. Like two things I'll say. There are a lot of schools that kind of think that equality is equity. So I hear a lot of teachers talk about, they need rigorous instruction and they need, this, they need that. And those things are kind of equal, but is it equitable? And then I'll say that, one thing I appreciate about learner variability and whole child practices is something that Stephanie said at the opening. It advances the conversation. So it goes beyond skill development. It goes beyond, standards-based planning, and it takes into account some of the critical conversations that we should be having right now around, stereotype threat, physical well-being, working memory, motivation, which are things that really impact our students who are, culturally and linguistically diverse.
Thanks, Ty. I think I really appreciate that. And the distinction between, of course, equality and equity, we can say it, but actually doing it is another matter. So I think that's really important, and glad to hear that this can, is advancing the conversation in those ways. So I think we've already kind of touched on some of question 2, but I'd love to kind of move to that question and think about what are some qualities in a portrait of a graduate or portrait of a learner. And so when we say portrait of a graduate, we're really thinking like, what are skills that students need to be successful when they leave school, right? To go out in the world, whether that's going to college or getting a job. But what are some qualities that we want them to be successful that you think are important to really bring attention to in daily learning? And so I'll do an open call here. Who wants to go first? Who has thoughts on this?
I can jump in if you don't mind. So when we think about the portrait of the graduate, it's truly a North Star document for your systemic change. You're truly looking at the hopes and dreams and aspirations that our community has for our students, and you're developing the mindsets and the skills that they need to create those hopes and dreams. So when we think about, in my context, we're working on this right now. We're looking at our community, and we're truly trying to stop the cycle of poverty and create societal change for our students while having them have the skills to develop functional relationships so that we stop that cycle. And so as we start thinking about the portrait of the graduate, we're looking at what the skills that we need to have are not necessarily just knowing English and history, but knowing how the world works and having students be goal-directed and resilient, like I was saying, have them know that they have a knowledge of the cultures and perspectives out on a global level, that they can communicate in multiple languages, that they understand the values and foundation of our nation and the stories, that they act responsibly and ethically, and that they have the soft skills like financial literacy, so that they leave our schools prepared to really be a functioning and successful global citizen. So as we are developing in this process, those are the kind of skills that we're developing, and how we're going through the process and involving our community, involving our stakeholders, so that we can have that North Star document that drives the systemic change that we need to see in our instruction and the way we actually run our school bell systems, everything that we do, maybe having more of a flexible schedule for kids to come, online opportunities versus in-person opportunities. So taking that perspective and having those that portrait really helps drive that change we want to see in our system.
Absolutely.
I want to build on some of the things that Michelle was saying. I definitely agree with resilience. Something that came to mind for me as I was preparing for today is confidence. I noticed that a lot of our students lack confidence in large spaces, right? Like they're comfortable verbally discussing content in small groups or in classrooms, but the minute that observers enter the room, they kind of shrink. So I really hope that teachers and leaders can call attention to confidence, so that kids can take risks outside of their normal environments. The other thing I'll name is, perspective taking. And Michelle mentioned this in terms of kids being aware of global dynamics. And I'll, draw the example of my niece here. My niece is living in a suburban environment, so she has no idea what like the inner city is like. And I find that whenever, we ride through the inner city, she can be very dismissive of, their perspective. And I find that in schools, teachers are excited or they're eager to explore the perspectives of refugees and folks from different countries. And I always wonder, what about the neighborhood children? What about the kids who, may look like these refugees or who may look like the kids coming from foreign countries? So, I would hope that, our students have the quality of like critical thinking, that they can take the perspectives of multiple groups and make informed decisions and, be more humane about, their day-to-day.
Thanks, Ty. That's really powerful. I appreciate the point about being, not only thinking globally, which is really important, but also locally and understanding your own like immediate community and how it intersects with neighboring communities. Lots more on that, but Allison, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's so many things I want to talk about right now. Everything that everyone just said is exactly the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. We're actually working right now on a sort of portrait of a graduate model for the Learner Variability Project. So I've been doing a lot of reading about these skills we're talking about: critical thinking, civic mindedness, collaboration, those kinds of things. But a few things that just came to mind to me when I was listening to both of you speak are, one of the things that I've been reading about with civic mindedness is really giving students, trusting them and giving them responsibility, even at a young age, even as little as, the kindergartners, that kids can take on, chores around the house. They can learn about, their community and make change, and giving them that responsibility is going to allow them to grow these critical thinking skills, these civic mindedness skills that, that we're talking about that they need. So I think a really big take risks that, was mentioned by Ty. So I think really, giving, like, centering the students in their own learning and empowering them and trusting them with that. And along those same lines, another factor that we've been working on that I find really exciting is curiosity, which is not something that comes up often in these general portrait of a graduates, though they're related to a lot of the things that we're talking about. But, similarly with children, you see curiosity with little kids, that's what they're doing. But that curiosity kind of tends to dissipate once they get into school. I mean, it's still in them, but at school, they're not really given the time or the, space to be curious, to ask questions, to think. And so again, I think really centering the students in their learning and giving them the space to work through that curiosity, to ask questions is really important. So I can talk about this forever, but I'm going to end there.
I hope you all had a great time in your breakout rooms. I know we had a great conversation. And so I see a few questions in the Padlet, but if you also want to drop any other burning, lingering questions in the chat, we'll try to get to them. But I'm going to start with one I see here on the Padlet for our panelists. How do we go beyond acknowledging the issues like math anxiety and address underlying barriers to learning? And has some context here about like creating access and to materials and things like that. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Underlining barriers to what?
To learning. So how are you addressing barriers to learning? So if, kids have certain issues, maybe like math anxiety, how are you addressing the barriers that those create so that they can engage, in the learning process?
And this came out of Allison's room. So I wonder if Allison kind of wants to maybe kick off there and give a little bit of more context and kind of what we talked about.
Sure. Yeah. So first off, I wanted to clarify, which I did in my room, that when I said that you can't teach a student who has math anxiety math, I did not mean to say it like that. I meant that you cannot just try to teach the math without addressing, the underlying, background issue. So I think everyone probably understood that, but I clarified it with them. And so I think, yeah, I think that is, that's an example of what to do is to really try to understand the learners and address, not just the symptoms, but, what's really the root cause. One other thing that came up at the end of our discussion that I thought was also really important to note is to think about, not just think about, we always say learner variability is not a student problem, it's a design challenge. So it's not, just how do we address this problem with the student, but what can we do in our classroom to remove these barriers? So maybe, we don't have time tests, or, what are those things that are really causing this anxiety that's coming from? How do we create a sense of belonging in the math classroom so that, maybe girls feel like they can do math? Maybe we bring in, a woman mathematician. So thinking about not just how do we address the anxiety within that single student, but thinking about contextually, how can we kind of create a sense of belonging so that everybody feels like they can be successful.
And to just add on to that, it takes a lot of time to change the mind, to create mind shifts with teachers, to know that they don't teach to one size fits all, that they have to know their students. And that's a rise of social emotional learning and ensuring that teachers are well versed in culturally responsive pedagogy. We have a whole high number, 34% of our students are English learners. So we need to know that our teachers are culturally responsive to their learning variabilities, and ensuring that teachers have the skill set to understand how to address these different variabilities. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and setting a culture where you change the hearts and minds of the teachers. And I've been in classrooms that the teachers say the kids just aren't getting it. Well, the data shows that 90% of your kids are getting D's and F's. Is that a teacher problem or a student problem? Are you telling me that 90% of your kids are dumb, or are you not reaching them? And what are those barriers? So utilizing that data to hold those conversations with teachers to understand, hey, what aren't you bringing to make sure that 95% of those students are achieving, or 100% are achieving?
Jessica, I want to add that, one thing people can think about doing, are student empathy interviews. And not just talking to kids, but also talking to parents. Like, one thing we're finding in a school that I work with is, a good number of our English language learners have not had formal schooling, so in their native country. So a lot of teachers tend to just translate material thinking that they'll be able to read in Spanish. However, they probably weren't in school in Spanish. I mean, they probably didn't attend school in their native country, so they probably can't read in Spanish. So how do we design around that issue? And the only way we would know about that is if we, spoke with parents during intake or took time out to speak with kids. And then I'll just also add that schools have to be prepared for the things that they hear, right? Like, are we listening to listen, or are we listening to act?
I think that's a really important point, and I do feel like really being able to understand your students and feeling, I think it's kind of two things. One, like the teachers having that mindset shift, but also feeling like they have the freedom to be able to address their students' needs. I feel like sometimes teachers feel this pressure to like stay on script or stay on pace with certain things, and this is oftentimes finding different ways to accommodate students getting off the script, right? Or making that time. And so I think that that's really important, that both teachers and students feel like they can do that when they need to. I have another question that I want to, or if we have time, which I don't think we do, but I'll just throw it out there. It was an interesting conversation we had in our room, which is how we can promote more interdisciplinary pathways for students and teachers, because when we think about Portrait of a Graduate, there's so many skills beyond just content knowledge that we want students to have. And it seems like an interdisciplinary, challenge-based learning, project-based learning kind of approach really helps cultivate a lot of those skills. But because of standards and the pressure to be these content experts, a lot of the work ends up being siloed. And so if you have anything that you're doing that you feel like helps promote interdisciplinary pathways for either teachers or students, feel free to throw it out there in a minute or less.
I mean, writing is always that skill that crosses content areas. And if, teachers can think about how to get kids to, demonstrate their thinking in science and writing, demonstrate their thinking for math and writing, that is an exercise that I believe spans content areas.
Right. And I think PBL, we did a tiny standards-based project to build tiny houses to solve the homeless problem in LA, and actually built a model to scale, wrote letters to the city council proposing in Spanish. We created the posters for our community in Spanish, telling them why we're building this and how they could come to the city council meeting. So developing those projects that are standards-based, yet are relevant to the community.
And I'll just quickly add, this came up a little bit in our panel as well, or our group as well. Just thinking about how to integrate those Portrait of a Graduate skills within the content areas too. So obviously curiosity is tightly connected to so many learning outcomes, but science, right? So thinking about how to weave those in as well, to think that we're not adding it on or replacing it, but just integrating it to make learning stronger.
Well, I cannot thank you all enough for the amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it. And to all our participants that were with us in the breakout rooms, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our time today.